Sounds like we're speeding when that music comes on. Hey, everybody. Dan here with Steve and Derek Shulman on Yesshift and Drum Talk TV at the same time. And we're here to talk about a really great, this has been like, I know that people have been waiting for this for a long time to hear your story from your typewriter, basically. Giant steps. For those who've been under a rock for 70 whatever years, well, not quite. Derek's a founding member of, oh gosh, one of my favorite bands, Gentle Giant, but then took a big pivot and went on to be a major player in the record executive world, signing some of everybody's favorite biggest acts over the last 30, 40 years. We'll talk about that. But Derek, welcome. It must be nice to finally get this done and see it getting out there in the market.
Yes, it would be nice. I've been, it was put back a couple of weeks, so it should have been out in the beginning of October because of some issues that is out in the beginning of December. But yeah, it would be nice to have other people hear and see about what I had been up to the last 4 or 5 years, just writing things about my life and everything around it, including Gentle Giant, including the other bands, and including things that happened before Gentle Giant, of course.
Wow, that's awesome. Steve, take it away.
Right. So how long had you been writing this memoir? Had you been writing in diaries over the years? How much involved physical resources you had to refer back to, and how much of it relied more on memory?
It was all memory. I'll be honest with you. It was well, actually, I should restate this. I actually went over. Well, I always go over to the UK once or twice a year to see my brothers. But now it's just one brother, unfortunately. And in 2018, so I brought in a little recorder to ask Ray and Phil what they remembered about when we first started as Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, if you like, and all these various other things that happened during the period of that time, going into Gentle Giant, and of course Phil left after Octopus, and then from there on with Ray, what he remembered, little vignettes that I probably had forgotten about, and so I got them. I had these things on tape, and some of that I'd forgotten about. So I guess I had thought about doing it around 2018. Around 2019, we have had good friends who, one person in particular, who was the head of he was the book editor of the New York Times, and we went together for dinners, and I'm telling these stories about Gentle Giant at the Hollywood Bowl, or hanging out with Bon Jovi or Elton John or whatever, and he'd say, "You should write a book." And I said, "I'm not a writer." He said, "No, you should write these various things." He continued, he cajoled me. And around the beginning of 2019, he said, "You should start just 2 hours aside every day." And I started, actually. I did start and did about 60 or 70 pages. But it was very iffy for me. It was very difficult for me to concentrate. I pick up the phone and then go around and then be distracted elsewhere. So it was not an easy thing for me. And then COVID hit. And so 2020, of course. And I actually got COVID very early on. I was one of the first people, thankfully. I dodged a bullet and it didn't go any further than just feeling lousy. But I was 6 weeks in isolation in my bedroom with Cuomo on TV and a laptop. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this time here? I feel lousy. So I thought, let me think. Okay, I started this, I put it aside 6 months ago. So that's when I got serious about writing a little more. And that got me started in putting Giant Steps together in what you see, as you see it today. And then, I got through that in 2021, and then I kind of put it aside again. And then about 2.5 years ago, I thought, let me get back and do this, because I got so far, and I got a co-writer to do to listen to some of the stories as opposed to me typing them all, and give them to me, and he basically transcribed the stories, and we put it together to become Giant Steps.
That's wonderful. What we know how book publishing works, and before a book gets published, of course, it needs to be edited. Were there things that were trimmed down for the sake of space, or to make room, or for flow? And if so, might we see some of those excerpts or stories appear otherwise? Or I'm already bugging you about another book.
There was quite a lot of stuff trimmed down, actually. It's 300 pages, but it was about probably 400 plus. So there's plenty more, but I tell you, the process of doing this was much harder than putting a song together for Gentle Giant, let me tell you.
Oh, I bet. And that says a lot. So maybe we'll see the director's cut someday.
Who knows? Let's see.
Yeah, awesome.
Right.
Thanks for sharing that.
Would you say that distance from events helps to write an honest perception of how the events occurred?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, would you say that distance from the events in the past helps to make an honest perception of how they occurred when you write it?
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I'm in my late 70s, and so I could give a perspective which is not in the moment, and far enough away to understand, for instance, why Phil left the band and what his reason was, as opposed to being in the moment during that period of time and being pissed off at him, leaving us high and dry, and understanding that his family came first, and so it should have. So absolutely it did, and in fact, gave me perspective of me being on the Darth Vader side of the business, if you like.
Yeah.
and then prior to that, being a musician and a creative person, and it gave a perspective of me, for me, to understand what was the most important thing for me. And I'll give you the answer right now. As much as I had success, if you like, on the other side of the fence, and I had a great time, there's nothing like being in a band of people that you love and are creative and brothers and brothers on stage. So there's nothing like being a musician, doing something that no one's ever done before. You created something that has never been put on a map or put on paper or whatever it is. So that perspective, if you like, having been on various sides of the fence, reflecting back and having had, again, some success on certain things, it made me realize that my life as a musician was the most important time in my life.
Thanks for that. Neat question too, Steve. This comes up a lot in music discussions amongst music fans, amongst musicians, and I don't know how much of a difference there is in perception based on the age or generation, but how much does prog rock owe to the Beatles? And some people credit the Beatles for inventing psychedelia, and where Pink Floyd kind of started. Like, would there be prog without any of that?
There wouldn't be any music scene without the Beatles. Beatles started everything. The Beatles were everything. In England, if it weren't for the Beatles, there'd be no Gentle Giant, there'd be no Pink Floyd, there'd be no Led Zeppelin. The Beatles started everything, and had it not been for the Beatles, there'd be Pat Boone still probably rolling out the song.
Yeah.
Absolutely, the Beatles changed not just the musical world, changed the culture in England especially. And thankfully, I was at the same one. I was a little younger, but it changed my perspective and what I wanted to do. I was going to be a musician anyway, because that was in my family. But the Beatles being as big as they were and doing what they did, that they changed everything in the culture in England, musically, and what you could do, what you were able to do as a working class kid.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah. And you mention in your book Giant Steps that pop bands in the 60s, they had these people who would transition into more intricate and complex music and what would become prog rock bands. You even mentioned May Booker's Toy Shop leading to Yes, Steve Howe's bands before he joined Yes. Were these changes super noticeable at the time, or more so noticeable when looking back after the fact?
You didn't realize, well, we realized certainly that what we were doing, because we were, we were a band in Simon Dupree of the Big Sound. We worked hard. We were a very hardworking band, and we were pretty successful. We had one major big hit and a couple of minor hits, and we were in Europe. We were very popular in Europe and England. But the problem was when you were a pop band, you start to play to audiences that wanted to hear the hits, and your musicality and your ability to do something a little more was stymied. So having a hit or hits would be a millstone around your neck, because you couldn't, as you get older and you get better at your instrument, and you suddenly see things that could be done, you get stuck into that groove, and you either break up, or you say this is not for me, or you move on to do something different. Thankfully, we moved on to become Gentle Giant, and we were lucky enough to have someone like Elton John in the band, who was which is a true story about how he was able to turn me and Ray on to bands that we'd never heard of, or like Spirit, for instance, in the US, and Zappa, of course, we knew about. But he was a real muso, and he said, "You guys are really great. You should listen to these bands that are doing something interesting." Again, when I think you know the story already, but when we decided to become Gentle Giant, Elton, Reg, as he was then, wanted to be in the band, and we listened to his music and said, "Thank God for him, not for us."
Yeah. Well, I gotta ask, did Elton suggest the white jumpsuit?
Remind me of that. That's when I look at some of these shows. What the hell was I thinking?
But in retrospect, I mean, when I watched those concerts that were filmed back then, and given the time and everything, it so fits with you in the white jumpsuit. You got John Weathers in his Oakland A's outfit. It just somehow it fit. But that's golden history. Also, I just want to mention to the folks before my next real question that if you notice under Derek's name, it says credits. Normally for our guests, we put credits, but Derek's credits, not only, of course, Gentle Giant, but he went on, as we've been talking about a lot of what's included in the book, to be a very, very big player as a record executive and an AR person with Polygram Records, with Atco. I mean, he discovered and signed bands like Bon Jovi, Dan Reed Network, Cinderella, Dream Theater, Kingdom Come, resurrected some bands you may have heard of like AC/DC and Bad Company. So we just put credits. That's all we left there. So there you go. There's your credit. There was another shift later on, and these musical pivots that I see that have gone on through time, like the way 80s brought the skinny tie and new wave, along with hairspray and hairsprayed hair and spandex, the way it affects fashion and all these other things. But another later shift in the 70s was when prog bands started to do, more catchier songs. And it's neat that you get your perspective of how Gentle Giant need to do, like exactly what you said, kind of make a stab at something like Giant for a Day. Right. It's a good example of how that trend, and I think we've seen that with Genesis. We saw it later with Genesis, later with Pink Floyd to a degree, certainly later with Jethro Tull. And it's interesting how I've heard so many people like Richie Blackmore, Ian Anderson, and other artists say they never listen to what's happening. And I'm not saying they're lying, but it's interesting to me how just like histories are coincidences of countries so far apart before there was international communication. And with a lot of artists, these changes kind of morphed around the same time together. And I just find that real interesting. What's your take on those pivots and how that occurred in the late 70s? Did the
Well,
business drive that, Derek?
yes. I mean, I can't say no. The business drove it because the radio was the most important marketing tool
Mm-hmm.
for any band. We certainly, playing live. That was our audience. I mean, that's how it became popular in a lot of places.
Right.
Radio. We were never a radio band, but
Right.
but certainly in the earlier '70s in America, certainly they played whole sides of music, and there was a whole different thing. And then in the sort of mid to late '70s, radio became much more streamlined. So they play one song from an album, and that song usually would on FM, and it would, if it became very popular, it would become an AM track, which would be a pop hit. And bands that you mentioned were able to hone their sounds to get their catchy, chorus, verse, chorus, middle eight, etc. I think we probably were aware that we should try, but thankfully, I'm going to say thankfully, we were successful because, and I say that with, again, many, many years later in retrospect, because I think it would have made Gentle Giant inauthentic.
That's exactly the word I had in my mind. I totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I like that.
We stopped it at the right time because first of all, Civilian wasn't successful, and we tried again honing our sound down. And I think that album was a very good 1980s album, but it wasn't successful. And there's a point where you say, okay, do we carry on and become a parody of ourselves, or do we carry on and just dwindle down where a member leaves, someone comes in, and then you become a tribute band? No, we stopped at the right time and closed the chapter
And left it there as it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've seen other bands go on and their set lists keeping the classics as staples, and it's fine for them if they do that, if they enjoy doing that. But it's also refreshing to read your perspective of the decision to close the Gentle Giant chapter when you did. It's all about knowing your limits when it comes to what you want, as well as matters of health, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly that. It is, and me and Carrie had families by then, the creative juices were running low, and again, we were threatened to a certain degree by the fact that Yes and Genesis were able to have these pop hits, and we didn't. Again, we worked that 10 years of Gentle Giant, where we basically gave it everything. We recorded, we toured, we rehearsed, we played live on stage. We didn't have a day off, during those periods. And I tell you, at my old age, they were the best 10 years I've ever had.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And again, having had different periods of time when I was in a different band and/or in the business, etc., having big hits with other bands. But yeah, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that period of time when the doors were, everything was possible, and that's what we tried. Everything. It was what our possibility was always there, and we tried everything.
Yeah, you certainly did. And that's a big part of why everyone who loves Gentle Giant loves Gentle Giant. And you maintained the integrity of your original art form and your own sensibilities by closing that chapter. And I have so much respect for that. It's great. At what point, you also paint a great picture in the book of Tony Visconti working with you prior to Gentle Giant. He'd worked with the Strawbs, Badfinger, T-Rex, David Bowie. Was there a certain moment or a certain piece of music or a certain album, or was it him as a person? What was it that said he's our next producer?
I didn't know Tony. We didn't know Tony. We were just our manager said, Tony sounds like a good choice for you guys. And he played Tony the demos, and Tony said, yeah, I'd love to be part of it. In
Oh
fact,
wow.
I'm seeing him on Monday, actually, at an event in New York.
Oh wow.
No, he loved the demos, and we became, it was like a marriage in heaven. I think, these certain stars align, and you never know when they're going to happen. But he was also, he loved what we were doing creatively. He was also a classically trained musician. And he basically taught us how to make an album.
Wow.
He actually taught Gentle Giant how to be Gentle Giant, actually, on that first album. And he the recorder, a quartet, he actually did himself. I mean, that was Tony. So he was really important in kickstarting the band, and he was there for acquiring the taste as well. But at that time, we were on the road. Me and Ray, I think more than anyone, kind of enjoyed seeing what Tony did with the boards and with the faders and everything else, and he allowed us to touch them a little bit. So I would say Tony was very important in the birth, if you like, of Gentle Giant.
Well, how we never know as fans until we learn through things like interviews and whatnot what our favorite artists listened to. So it might sound like a silly question, but were you familiar with his previous work at the time, or did you dive into his catalog to see, okay, yeah, this is a match, or just go with it?
Not at all. He was basically starting out on his own as well. I mean, he'd come from New York to London himself, and at the same time we were doing our first album, he was producing Bowie's Man Who Sold the World and T-Rex at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Trident Studios, and we were all together in this new thing that Tony Visconti was handling. So we were hanging out with Bowie's band and Mark Bolan, being Mark Bolan in the studio. I mean, Mark was like, we were cracking up actually, because Mark Bolan was Mark Bolan all the time.
Oh wow.
I mean, what you saw on stage was Mark Bolan off stage.
Wow.
But it was great. I mean, it was amazing. And Queen were in the next studio to us, so it was just an incredible experience to be part of that at the beginning of the 70s.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And the mention of how Tony encouraged camaraderie made me think of something I've been thinking about recently, where I imagine that a good producer would recognize the needs of the band and maybe know when they need to take a break and go out and relax and then come back to work. So it sounds like there was a real good workflow, wasn't there?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, Tony was very smart in understanding that when when there's some downtime or time you're trying to think of something which to put in a song, he said, look, okay, let's go to the pub next door and have a drink and just stop working for an hour or two, then come back refreshed and either stop the session or come back tomorrow. So yeah, he taught us how to produce a record and how a record should be produced, and taught the band how to be a band effectively.
Yeah. Awesome. You also mentioned having an alter ego as Simon Dupree, and that made it easier to perform when being someone else. And later on, you mentioned David Bowie seemed a bit shy in social situations and more expressive in music. And of course, later he'd cement Zig of Stardust, that identity not long after. And did that parallel ever cross your mind in the day of how you two both used alternate identities as musicians?
Well, Simon Dupree was a name that was given to me. I was a front guy. I was a singer in that group. So that was, I became Simon Dupree. And I just remember poor Phil and Ray, they were asked questions like, what's it like to have a famous brother? So I get ragged all the time. But, what Simon Dupree did, if you like, for us as Gentle Giant, was enable us to have stagecraft. To get on the stage and look at the audience and say, come on, let's have fun. That was a great apprenticeship, if you like, to become Gentle Giant, and something that Gentle Giant, I think, had probably as much, if not more, than most other bands of our kind, that we love to have fun on stage and wanted our audience to also have fun and have smiles on their faces when we performed. And I think even the fact that when we toured America with Black Sabbath, which is a horrible bill, we were able to use our stagecraft to win the audience over. We went on stage to booze, where everyone was booing. And we were able to think, okay, they're booing. So what are we going to do? We're going to do our heavier songs and say, look, here we are. And if you don't like us, and eventually after a few songs, we'd get a smatter of claps, and we went off stage generally to claps. So it was a good apprenticeship to become Gentle Giant.
That's neat. I just want to add to that folks, if you haven't ever seen a video of Gentle Giant performing live, you could see the fun you guys are having. I mean, Ray, bless his heart, giving Gary Green those funny looks when they're doing their acoustic guitar duet from excerpts of Octopus. Gary always banging that foot is always the metronome. John Weathers, of course, some of the best drummer faces on the planet. You conducting the band. I mean, everyone's having fun. And that's, I hope that's why we become musicians to begin with, because it's fun. But everyone, of course, has a different way of expressing it. And stereotypically, I think a lot of people think that the more eccentric and weird the music is, the more heady and serious the musicians must be. And it's not always like that.
We took our music seriously, but we didn't take ourselves seriously.
Yeah, right.
Mentioning John, it's very rare when you get a star drummer. John was a star.
Absolutely.
Only like Mike Portnoy's and today.
Yeah.
But John was on stage, I was front and center, making all sorts of crazy moves, and John was behind me making crazy moves. So
yeah, absolutely.
While the music was going on, so it was a lot of fun. It was great, as I said, a great 10 years.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you touched on the tour with Black Sabbath. We've heard other bands say that going to America is when they hit it big, and it's a huge part of the success story. But you described the chaos, particularly from audiences. Would you say audience etiquette has generally improved over the years, or does it really depend on where you see a concert?
Well, I think in today's market, when we were playing the States, bands were being, there wasn't. It was a bizarre thing because we were on. At the very beginning, we were on the same stage as the Eagles and Peter Frampton. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, a band is like this, so that sounds like a good a similar audience. You were playing to different kinds of audiences, and radio was different as well. You hear different kind of music on the same station, but so again, you had to learn how to grow your audience and be really great on that stage. So that's what we did, in America. In Europe was a little different because we were lucky enough to do 2 tours with Tull, with Jethro Tull, and that broke us in a lot of places in Italy and Germany, and also actually some parts of the States as well. They were very accommodating to us, and we loved to be with them at that, and I have the opportunity. And from there, we became headliners in our own right, if you like.
Wow. You mentioned something before my next question. I just want to mention that you mentioned something that means so much to me that I bring up from time to time. And that is that back then, as a little kid learning drums, I'd put headphones on and it'd be plugged in. I'd hear the local hip radio station in Los Angeles, and music was not segregated by genres the way it is now. You'd hear Sly and the Family Stone, Neil Diamond, Led Zeppelin, Linda Ronstadt. I mean, it was just all over the place, and I didn't know I was listening to different music, and it helped me in my early formative years as a musician, just learning all these different things, not knowing what I was really learning, or learning a lot of the same things and how to apply them in different arenas, maybe.
Right. It was a whole different thing. So the audiences, look, the headliner would be the artist that the most of the audience would come to see. but you're like, and a special guest on the bottom. You'd work your ass off to get some claps and some following. And if you were any good, you come back again as the second on the bill or whatever it is, and then ultimately become a headliner. So we did a lot of special guests until we became headliners. So and that says a lot for what we were and how we played as a band.
Yeah, hard-working band, absolutely. And in the book, you do allude to this, but without giving away too many spoilers, of course, because we want people to look forward to getting the book. What were the conversations like with any of the members with Yes during the Close to the Edge tour? And did you hang out with them, or like what was that tour like for you guys when you played with them?
It was, well, we actually did quite well. I mean, we played. The audience reaction was very good.
Yeah.
The guys in Yes were, I think, intimidated by us. I'm being very honest with you.
Oh wow.
And it's when you get it, we never had that problem with bands that supported us. But I think that every gig, there'd be 6 inches less stage. Until eventually, probably the last gig, I think we all had about 2 feet of space.
You're all up on John's drum riser.
I was probably standing on the drum riser along with John.
Yeah.
So it was, and the lights were getting. We had follow spots and everything else, and ultimately it was like one lamp looking at us. So
crazy.
I think
the night light.
Personally, they weren't very friendly at that. I mean, it was okay. We weren't unfriendly, but they weren't really very accommodating. Trying to think and then we did a Relayer tour. I think part of that Relayer tour, whereas Patrick Moraz was great. I mean, Patrick we're getting friends, and I'm still friends with him. I know, obviously, I know the band very well because I got to know them afterwards because I had to work with them in a record company situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was a little weird at that time because whereas Tull said, whatever you want to do it, and they were that confident in themselves, which says a lot.
It says a lot. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and the album Octopus was released in the US with alternate art by Charles White instead of what Roger Dean had done. And in Giant Steps, you speculate that maybe Columbia Records thought it would be confused with Roger Dean's work with Yes. But what's funny is that at that point, he'd only done Fragile and Close to the Edge with Yes, which to me looked pretty different from Octopus. And I see Octopus as looking closer to something like what he was doing for OCBisa and maybe even Squawk around that time. But that must have been like a strange situation there with the art, right?
Yeah, it was bizarre, and it wasn't. We weren't in control, and they, Columbia, said they wanted a different cover, and actually the cover we put together in the US was actually a really good cover. It was actually our idea because we picked up this jar of an octopus in San Francisco, and said, "How about this?" And they said, "Wow, good idea." And the art director said, "Okay, we'll do this as a die cut," and it turned out really well. So I think both covers are really good today. I prefer Rogers, but I think they're both good.
Absolutely.
Right. And you also briefly mentioned opening for Rick Wakeman. Would this have been about the era of his King Arthur album or something else?
The King Arthur, yeah. Yeah.
That
was fine. I mean, Rick is much more of a. He's not intimidated by anyone, and we did very well on that tour. I mean, the audiences were on our side from the start, and we were actually starting to become, a headliner in certain parts of the States as well. So that was good for us. Yeah,
those are great bills. I mean, when you compare you guys, and no offense to either band, but when you compare you guys in Black Sabbath to you guys on a bill with Jethro Tull or with Rick or with Yes, like duh, of course the audiences are going to love you. It seems so obvious now, but did you guys expect that at the time? Like, oh, thankfully now we're with these guys, this is going to rock. Or did you always feel like you were testing the waters before you headlined?
No. When we headlined, we knew when we decided to headline, we knew that who we were, and we knew that we were ready to headline. There's one gig in particular. There was various moments in as a band that I remembered, but one show in particular was at the Shrine Auditorium in
LA.
Yeah, and that I still remember that show because we were on fire. We were playing our asses off, and we were really good at that show. And at the end of the show, the lights went up and they went down for our encore, and we came out for an encore, and we did our encore. I can't remember, probably excerpts from Octopus or whatever. We finished that, and the lights went up. And the crowd didn't. It was about 8,000 people. The crowd didn't leave. So, so we had to come out again. So I think we had one or two more songs that we hadn't rehearsed for a long time. So we went out there and said, "Man, okay, let's try and put this stuff together." So we went out again and did a couple. I can't remember what songs they were, and we did those. And the crowd went apeshit, and the lights went up. That was the curfew time. And the lights went up, and the crowd wouldn't go. They would not leave.
Wow!
And the speakers said, "Please leave. The show's over." The crowd would not leave.
Wow!
And we thought, "What are we going to do?" So, what we did at the last second, because we played the song when we were tuning up in sound check in the midnight hour. Road is ready. We said, "Okay, let's go out and do it in the midnight hour," because that's all we knew.
How fitting too.
Exactly. So we did that, and the lights went up, and eventually the crowd left. But I just remember that show.
Yeah.
How good was it? But that feeling of the crowd not letting us go.
I had a cousin that went to that show.
Really?
Yeah. My cousin David Kramer told me all about it. Yeah, back in the day. Yeah, that's awesome. And we both have the new release of Playing the Fool with all the extra stuff and everything like that. Steve's got his vinyl right there. My CD's still in the truck on constant rotation with itself. Would you agree, or do you feel that these days, and for how long, if so, live albums basically a rite of passage and maybe almost a responsibility of an artist? Like, give us some live stuff. Let's have that. How do you feel about that?
I think when we did one, it was the right time and the right place, because we just finished Interview. We hadn't done that live yet, and I think the reason that there was quite a lot of live albums at that time was because I'm going to say something. It was because the bands that were out there that were good could play. And actually play live without a hard drive, without auto tune, without
Right.
anything that embellished their music. And so what you heard on that album is what you would hear at the show. And that during that period of time, there were quite a few live albums. Obviously, the Frampton one being the biggest. But bands could play in those days. You weren't beholden to the the technical, the tech stuff that you have that with the auto tunes, the drives and backing tracks and everything else. That was us. This was who we were. We had no touch ups afterwards. That was the band live, and that album shows that what the band was like being part of that tour.
I love that, because growing up, almost every band that I'm even still into, the first album I ever got was their live album. I got your guys' Playing the Fool initial release, my first Gentle Giant album. I got Yes songs and Close to the Edge at the same time, but listened to Yes songs first, then heard Close to the Edge and thought, what's going on here? Because it was just so different with Bill on drums versus Alan. And I mean, Peter Frampton, Foghat, Jethro Tull, Deep Purple, Made in Japan was the second album I got, but it's like that always meant so much. I really want to hear what they sound like first, then work my way. Rush first album was All the World's This Day. I just think there's so much to that, where that is the true band, not to take away from what cemented the compositions in the first place when we first heard them, when they were first released as studio versions. But to hear a band live to me is to really hear a band.
Yeah,
You know,
that's exactly what we did it for,
Yeah.
and that's why there were quite a lot of really good live albums. Because Yes could play live. I mean, they were really good.
Yeah.
At their best, they were second to none.
Yeah.
We're tall.
Yeah, awesome. You also paint a good picture of the shift, and it seems like such a big shift to being a record executive and going through the reasoning decisions like having Bon Jovi, go on tour with the Scorpions and Kiss and whatnot. Did it feel like another alter ego, or was this new role more made up of the sum of your past experiences? Did it feel like you were taking a big leap?
Yes, to a degree, absolutely. It was because yes, to a degray, but having had the experience of kind of looking after the band in certain respects, Gentle Giant, quasi manager with Ray, and producing an album, at the same time with Ray. I kind of knew a little bit about what that was about. So when I was offered a job in a record company, my initial reaction was no thanks. But I decided to take that job and morphed into A&R. And then I found myself. I realized, okay, this is kind of where I fit. If I can find bands and artists, again, using that word authentic, who are authentic and have a vision of themselves that's like no one else. And that includes, bands like a Bon Jovi. That includes bands like a Pantera. That includes a band like Dream Theater. All these bands were authentic, and they had a focus on with themselves. That's who they were. They weren't going to follow someone. They were going to be.
Right.
They were going to be their own thing.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you truly took the acumen you gathered in your first journey as a musician and applied it to the next journey.
Right. No, I did. And something else that was I was very fortunate in being in my situation in a record company is there was no musician that could say, you don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to not have to have it all night in a van. You don't know what it's like to, not have a hotel room or sleep in or do anything that I've done, because I did know what it's like. I did know what it was like to record, in the studio or not record or whatever. So there wasn't a band that could say, you don't know what it's like. So I was very lucky that I could listen to them and be part of who they were if I was working with them. So that's something that did me very well in the side of the fence, if you like.
That's awesome. Oh, just a couple quick comments from the audience before we ask our last magical question that I know will have a magical answer.
Yeah, and I have one more question before yours, Dad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So you also talk about sort of your perception or relationship with the prog rock genre and how these other prog rock bands would be super focused on one side of an album being a concept or even doing concept double albums, whereas Gentle Giant would kind of do more of its own thing, and not sure about being comfortable with Gentle Giant being labeled as one of the great prog rock albums, that debut album. So my question is, if the prog rock label was not a thing, what genre would you ascribe to Gentle Giant's music?
That's a good question. Do you have to have a genre?
Sorry?
Do you have to have a genre?
That's a great question.
Oh, yeah.
I think, honestly, I think Gentle Giant is what you hear and what you see. And I know that anything which is not 3 chords or 4 chords and a chorus and a middle 8, etc., is supposedly prog, but there's I don't have issues with it, but I think we were more than just another band in a genre. I think we were very I know you spoke to a couple of members. We were very how can I put this? What's the word? We were very sheltered. We were a real band. we weren't living in London. We lived together. We weren't touring. We actually lived in the same town. We actually, went fishing together. We were a band. We were a team from the start to finish, and so we didn't think and look at anyone else and say, let's be like this. So it was Gentle Giant. So that genre thing was Gentle Giant. That's what I could do.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's a hard question, actually.
But that's such a fair answer. And I want to thank everybody that's watching and who's kind of commented along the way where they're watching from and whatnot. But I do want to give a shout out to this comment. Thanks for doing this. Gene Bartholomew says, if anyone can't get the concert link I posted, just go to YouTube and search Gentle Giant Sight and Sound in concert. It's one of my favorite concerts to watch by you guys. Just amazing musicianship, and the filming and quality is great, especially given the time. Yeah, that's one of my favorite shows to watch by you guys. Thanks, everybody. Our last question for Derek is this. You may have partly answered it in your last answer, but you can answer for now. And we'd like an answer for back then. And the question is the Derek Shulman fun fact question. When you're in the slivers of time you have totally away from music, playing, writing, producing, being a record executive, all those things, give us a peek behind the curtain. What do you like to do that's for you? What's part of your balance, your life balance outside of music?
That's good. Well, I still love music. I mean, I have my guitars here. I have a bass, and I like dabbling. Family is very important to me, and I'm not, it's just, that's I don't know actually. I'm still involved as you see. Right now actually. What do I do outside? I'm a workaholic. I'm bad, even though I'm an old fart. And I'm now in the middle of remixing an album which never came out as a remix because we never had the multis in a glass house.
Oh,
wow. Yeah. You mentioned the book that it was tough to find those, so that's happening now.
That's happening. In fact, I'm going to the studio on the weekend to continue, and you'll hear it next year. But it sounds unbelievable. It sounds exactly what we wanted, and I'm really happy about that. When I listen to that album, today, as opposed to when we did it, I think how remarkable we are. I'm being honest here.
Such a great album. Yeah. Oh, I love that there's going to be a remix with today's technology.
I didn't, it's just because I'm in the middle of it, but I'm listening to it and said, how the hell did we do that? Years, at my age, and saying, wow, I couldn't even think about doing something like that then, but we did. So that's something I'm doing, and I'm involved with it, with the catalog and the book, and having downtime as well, because and taking my nap in the afternoon.
Yeah, I heard that for sure. Steve, show the book cover again, and please, Derek, tell us again when people can expect this now into December sometime.
This comes out in November 14 in the UK, December 2nd in USA. But where am I? In October 9th in Rough Trade in New York. Me and Tony Visconti are going to be there, and we're going to sign some advanced copies.
Nice.
So
that's
anyone
great.
Come by, and you get the advanced copies on October 9th, Rough Trade in New York.
That's great. Please send us the info for that and we'll put it up. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And people can go to the link in the description of this post, pre-order the book, go to gentlegiantband.com. Like, you'll want to read this. It's such an amazing read. Especially how you touch on, not just the music and the business, but also the relationships between the different people in your life.
Yeah. I have to touch on one more thing before we about prog music. What's interesting to me is that the hip hop world has for whatever reason, latched on to Gentle Giant, and we've become the targets, if you like, of the hip hop world, which I think is amazing, because I think some of the best prog music comes out of the hip hop world.
Yeah.
I really mean that. I think some of the most interesting twists and turns of whatever's going on is happening in the best of the hip hop world. I mean,
definitely.
In fact, well, you probably know about Travis Scott using the Proclamation as a but I'll tell you, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to tell you. I think we're going to be Songwriters of the Year in England, BMI Awards for that track, winning Songwriter of the Year for Proclamation.
Wow. That's awesome.
I'll keep my mouth shut, but I just opened it up.
Okay. Thanks. Derek, if you have a minute, just hang on the line with Steve and I after we say goodbye to the audience. Really appreciate your time. You're always so generous, not only with your time, but your info, your stories, and your wisdom. Really appreciate it. Like Steve said, folks, you've got to get this book. And folks, thanks for following what we do here on Drum Talk TV and on Yesshift. Lots of more fun stuff coming, and we will see you all very soon.